All right, what do you say? The synchronization of time and space between me sitting here in my attic and you doing whatever it is that you're doing has come. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Thank you for being here, whoever you are. If you're new, welcome. Everybody else, what's going on? How did your week go? How did you do? Who got the best of who? You or life? Don't answer that. Don't answer that. I hope everybody's feeling okay. You know, it continues to be quite a limbo time for me. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I did have to admit something to myself this week. You see, I have been mentioning on this show my apprehensions and confusions around returning to in-person events again. And I had to admit to myself that some of that is inside of me more than external. Yes, there are still pandemic restrictions and considerations, but people are doing it. I noticed that a lot of more people have returned to doing in-person events, and I think that some of it is just obstacles inside me. It's been 2 years, and what was a perfectly normal and natural thing for me to be doing before the pandemic, it no longer feels like a perfectly normal and natural thing. And I'm definitely going to get some events going, but I think I've decided to not try to make it happen before the end of the year. I had in mind I was going to get at least one in. I'm going to get one event in and not let 2021 get away. But I've decided instead that it would be better for me to put all of my energy into the new teacher training program that I'm working on, which I'm very excited about, and just start in the new year. Just give myself the end of the year. It's holiday time, and everything's still a little tweaky inside me and outside in the world, so I'm just going to give myself that little bit of time. And like I said, focus in on this new teacher training, which is really turning into something cool. And a number of you emailed me about it, and we put up a page, a training page, and there's an application form. Go fill out the application, even if you're just interested to hear more about it, because part of what I want to do in the next few months is invite people who have interest or people who want to participate in helping to create the structure some. Like, I have materials and ideas for how I think it might go, but I think it is more exciting if the people who are going to do it with me are involved in that process before it begins. So instead of somebody, showing up after something's already been formed, you get to form it with me. That's the whole point, right? So in any case, if you were interested in the idea of doing a teacher training with me, go to jbrownyoga.com to the training page. There's a button in the nav and on the homepage, and just fill out the application. It's just 3 questions, 3 simple questions for you to answer. And I'll be getting back in touch with everybody, and it's going to be pretty cool. Like I said last week, it feels good to be creating and trying something a little bit out of the box. So that's exciting. All the rest of it, like the external world and trying to travel and still figuring out when we're wearing masks and when we're not wearing masks, and if all the kids are getting vaccinated and all that. And no, let's not do it. Let's not go there. You know what else I'm not going to do? I'm not going to watch Squid Games. fuck that. I'm not watching Squid Games. I started to watch some of it with my wife, and yes, I can see it's artfully done. You know, it clearly has an artistic value, and at some other time in my life, I would appreciate watching it. But right now, I don't need dystopian violence or human evil. I don't need it in my brain any more than it already is, any more than it's around us in our culture is already, you know? I don't need it reflected back even more on the screens. So I'm not watching that shit. You know, like I was saying a few weeks ago, I'm really getting way more disciplined than I ever have about what I'm choosing to watch, what I'm choosing to read, what I'm choosing to listen to, what I'm putting in my eyes and my ears and my mouth. It's like the one thing I really do get to have some say in. And I want to be engaging in activities that are filling me up, not sucking me dry. And I am determined to be disciplined in this matter. And it's really been leading to some wonderful new inquiries. And today's conversation with Kristin Leal is certainly part of one of those inquiries. The inquiry around subtle body and spirit and some of the aspects of yoga practice that are harder to talk about. Regular listeners know I've been going on and on and on about it. Well, I reached out to talk to Kristin because she has this new book out called MetaAnatomy, and in the title even, it kind of hinted to energy bodies and aspects of yoga, like I say, that aren't normally in the anatomy books. And I thought that was interesting. And it turns out we actually had met before in a way. I didn't remember that until we spoke together, but we had met before and passing in the early New York days. But also, I feel I should mention this. You'll hear also Kristin has recently been studying with Rod Stryker. And if you were not aware of it, there's been quite a turmoil and scandal in the Parayoga community around things that happened with Rod. And so in any case, I did not know that Kristin was a student of Rod's when I scheduled time to talk with her. The morning of our recording, I was getting ready to talk to her, and I saw that she was a student of Rod's, and so I did bring it up. I felt like I had to. Fortunately, Kristin was open to speaking about it, so we do spend some time at the beginning of this conversation talking about that and talking about how to deal with teachers and teachings. And then we do also get to her book, and we get to the subtle body maps and some of this other stuff that I've been really pulling on. So lots of fantastic stuff in today's conversation. I was grateful to have it with Kristin, and I'm glad that you're going to get to hear it today. Real quick before we get to that, I do want to mention that if you want to connect with me in ways other than just listening to the show, I have weekly live stream classes that you're welcome to participate in. If you can't be there live, they're on replay for you to use. I also have a weekly teachers call where a bunch of yoga teachers from around the world hang out and talk, and you might be into that. Or there's a 12-hour online workshop and some other on-demand stuff, archive of the show, all of my stuff, along with the new teacher training stuff. If you want to put in an application for that, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think we will just leave it be there, and I will touch base with you on the other side. For now, though, I say we get to it. Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Kristin Leal. Hello?
Hello.
Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, all things considered.
Yeah.
I often say that I just feel like I have to hedge a little bit.
And pandemic related.
Just in general, yes, definitely pandemic related, but these days I need a little buffer just in case,
Right. Right.
I don't want to be held to it. If I say everything's great, But I'm glad to speak with you. You'll have to forgive me. We may have met and interacted some in the past, and I'm not remembering so well. I know we definitely crossed paths. Have we met before?
I think we've been in the same room a few times, but not formally met. You have, I'll never forget this. I reached out a few years back now, maybe 5 years back, to ask you about putting information online, putting teachings online. And if I wanted to pay for your time, I wanted to either take you out to lunch or pay your private rate. And you very generously were like, no, let's just hop on a Skype call. And it was Skype before Zoom. And you were like, let's just talk about it. I like talking about these things. And you very generously talked to me for, I don't know, an hour maybe, about the pros and cons of being online and how to do it. And it was, I'll never forget that. It was very generous of you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I am definitely having a return memory of that call, that Skype call. And I know my business producer is going to be so mad at me that I didn't charge you any money for it.
Oh, sorry.
But it's okay. But it was like in the earlier time, and oh, that's so cool. I have a memory of that. I'm so glad. Oh, see, that's why I knew there was I have memories of something. And then also when I just took a quick look, I get emails from people when books are coming out, like PR people are promoting books and stuff. And honestly, it normally, a yoga anatomy book wouldn't catch my attention. But yours did for a couple of reasons. One, it was called MetaAnatomy, and it said specifically physical and energetic anatomy, I think it said, right? Is that the word?
Sure.
And I was just sort of curious. I was like, oh, because I've been talking to people about subtle body and stuff and wanting to have conversations about that because people weren't talking about that stuff for a while. It was more about functional movement and vagal tone or something.
Right.
So I've been really curious. And so I was like, oh, that piqued my attention. And then frankly, I looked at the first line of your bio and it said 1993, Jivamukti, Sharon, David, and Kachi. And I was like, what? Wait a second.
Yeah.
That was where I took my first classes, exact year, same teacher. So, I mean, it is almost certain that 28 years ago, you and I were practicing next to each other in a very crowded room on Second Avenue.
Second Avenue, yeah.
Above a Thai food restaurant, if I recall.
Right. Yeah, it's quite possible. I think I followed you in Tokyo too. We had the same translator in Tokyo, and I think a couple of times I was right after
Tomoko
you left. Yes, yeah.
Oh my gosh, she's the best ever, isn't she?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
So great.
See, the way lives interweave, right?
Yeah, we've been circling each other for a few decades.
And here we are. We land in a phone conversation in 2021 amidst a crazy new world.
That it is.
Well, all right. So I'm curious then, just to revisit some history together. We were both at Jivamukti in 1993. It wasn't too long after that. I think it was 95 when there was kind of the split where they had their training program started and they made all the teachers have to go to Kirtan, and then some teachers left, like Leslie Kamenoff and Allison West. And I went with Allison. I followed her to where she was going and took classes with her. Did you stay at Jivamukti, or what direction did you go from those early Jiva classes?
I think I was quite enamored. I think I moved to the city when I was 17. So I was young and really enamored with just the vibe at Jivamukti.
It was cool. It was fun.
It was cool. It felt very cool. All my friends felt very much cooler than I was, and they took me there, and I kind of fell in love with it. So I stuck around for a while, but I didn't drink the Kool-Aid entirely. Mm-hmm. So I did dabble. Around that time was really exciting. As I remember it, it was a really exciting moment in New York yoga culture. A lot of visiting teachers were coming to New York. And so you were able to get, like in the late 90s, all these you were exposed to so much. You could go and take weekend workshops or little trainings or, and so I felt very free to go outside of Jivamukti and study with some other influences. But I definitely, I would consider that my home studio, if there is such a thing.
I definitely started there and like got my initial inspiration and like established a practice of sorts,
Yeah. And for all that we can say about, these different studios and what we've learned since, my very first class, there was talk about the Yoga Sutras and readings from it and chanting and breaking down the chanting and talks about Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And it was exciting and it felt I felt something, I don't know what it was, but I felt things and it made me curious enough to investigate further.
Yeah, I've talked about this too, that time, those yoga classes, they were filled with what is now in yoga teacher training.
Yeah.
Like there was just, you went to class and it was yoga education. It wasn't like there was asana practice for sure, but there was also the elements of like text and chanting and, all these other
meditation.
Yeah, all this other stuff. Like, and that's why I always make the joke that like before there was 200-hour teacher trainings, you just went to class every day for like a year or something. Yeah. And then at some point your teacher would say, I have to go out of town. You're going to cover my classes for me. Exactly, yeah. And you were like ready though, because you had learned stuff because you'd been in class. But at some point it became more about just doing like physical practice or asana pranayama. And a lot of that education part sort of got pulled out. And then that became the teacher trainings or something.
Yeah. Well, it was the time when people would do 2-hour classes. The 2-hour class at the studio.
That's an interesting point because it started out when I first got to Jiva. They were not 2 hours; they were an hour and 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. But I remember teachers would time 15-minute shavasana.
Yeah,
and everybody after 5 minutes would be squirmy, and they'd make you stay in shavasana for a full 15 minutes. And sometimes they would talk about how you're actually supposed to do equal parts asana shavasana, but in any case. As time went on, they got shorter and shorter. I think initially it was partly just like it was better on the schedule to not have it cut between the 30 minutes. So it went down to 90 minutes. Mm-hmm. But then it was down to hours. And like when I had the center in the late aughts, like in 2015, by that time, I was the only person who still had 90-minute classes in Williamsburg. And I ended up dropping them down to like 75 minutes,
Were people didn't have that much time?
It just became, Yoga Works and Moto Yoga came in and they all had hour classes.
Yeah.
And people just found that to be more convenient. And so that became the norm. And I was just like, I couldn't compete anymore. I kept like a couple on the weekends, the old school 90 minutes, because I just couldn't let go of it because it did mean that you didn't have time to do the education part anymore. You didn't have as much time to offer something other than just the breathing and moving part.
Yeah. It's such a shame. It's yoga without the context. It's just movement,
Well, that's the thing. And I appreciate what you said about it kind of cultivating a questioning in you or a deep a want for deeper inquiry.
Yeah.
And I think I got that same thing at that time too. And it was a very exciting time in yoga. So I guess I'm just curious, where do you go on from there? Do you end up doing a teacher training like we all did? And who did you end up doing it with?
Yeah, I did a few trainings, some with Rodney Yee and then some Anusara. I dabbled in the Anusara world. And my first 200 was at a little studio called Atmananda. Yeah.
I remember that guy. What was his name?
John T.
John T. Yes. Yep. I remember he developed a sequence, the Atmananda sequence back in the day. He had that place on Broadway.
The reason why I found it was one of my teachers, Adrienne Burke from Jivamukti. I don't know if you remember her.
I remember Adrienne, yes.
She was at Atmananda. So I went there to study with her. And she was running, I don't think at the time she was running the 200, but she was running the 300, which then I later took with her it was her program, but at Atmananda.
Right.
And then later on, studied with a bunch of different people, but found Alan Finger of Ishta Yoga about maybe, not great with dates, but maybe about 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And then Rod Stryker about maybe about 7 years ago.
I see. Speaking of which, I had no intention of bringing this up with you because I didn't know that you had studied with Rod Stryker at all. Right. And I, quite frankly, just this morning was getting ready to talk to you. And I admit I procrastinated. So it was this morning. But I looked and I saw that it cited Rod as your most current teacher. And, for the last week and a half, I've been having all these email exchanges and off the record conversations about what's been happening in the Parayoga community over Rod's ethical lapses. And I read his email. I read the open letter that the woman who was involved wrote. I read the statement of the 5 senior teachers who have resigned. Right. So, we and I haven't had any contact. I didn't let you know that I was going to bring this up, but I feel compelled. I have to ask, are you aware of all this stuff? And where you stand in relationship to all of it at this point?
Yeah. Thanks for asking.
I was like this morning, I said to my wife, I've been talking to people about this all week. And I've been honestly who's the right person to talk to about this? I've had these conversations before and gotten into trouble for all different kinds of reasons. So I try to be super careful, but I just said to her, I was like, I can't not ask her about this, so I'll bring it up and see what she feels like she wants to say about it or what you feel like you can say about it.
I'm not held to any non-disclosure. I don't feel any restriction in speaking publicly about it or openly about it. But I'm also not involved. I have heard everything. I have read everything. There's been several attempts at meetings and conversations of him and some of his students and fellow teachers. So I am deeply aware of what's going on, and it is profoundly disappointing and not entirely unexpected. I think that we need to extract the teachings from the teacher, right? The teachings are complex and nuanced and profound and deep and will take a lifetime and maybe several lifetimes to continually unpack and untangle and evolve, right? The teacher is the bucket that holds it, right? And the teacher is flawed because the teacher is human. And the teacher has only gone, so far as they've gone, right? And so I have evolved more in my understanding of my own practice and my own teaching with Rod in the last 8 years than I had in the prior 20. So I will continually be thankful that he spoke in a way that, and he held the teachings with such care and with such reverence that I was able to receive these teachings through him. Right. And I think he's a very skillful teacher, extremely skillful teacher.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
Well, I just want to say, and a flawed human being, like we all are. And so I very much believe the woman and her story, and I don't know how I feel about being in a classroom now with him. If knowing what I know colors the teachings to a point where I can, it's no longer of use. We'll see how it unfolds, how he speaks to it. Right now, I haven't been that comfortable or impressed with the way he's approaching, the making amends portion. I think we need to give space for people to make amends and to grow and to evolve and to admit their mistakes and to be fallible and to grow and to, change from that after they've been held accountable, to that. And I haven't been comfortable with how he's approached that part of it. So I don't know what my future is. But it's a complex situation that, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, the teachings that I've already...
I hear you. I was just having a conversation the other night with a bunch of teachers about this whole question of separating teachers from teachings. And I do have a new kind of frame in my mind for it in a way that I think makes it clear for me. But I do feel like I have to go back to one thing that you said, because a couple people I spoke to this week, for them, it was very unexpected. And it did happen in the past, if I'm not mistaken, to be clear. It did seem like this was something that happened some time back, but you said that it wasn't unexpected to you. And then I have to ask why. Why is it not unexpected for you?
Not the particular incident. That was, that did take me by surprise for sure. But the system in which many lineages are set up, many schools of yoga, whatever you'd like to call them, are hierarchical. And when the teacher is elevated and does nothing to create an even playing field or an even power structure, him and his organization, her and her organization, or between teacher and student, when there's such a divide and such a differential, and that is supported and even encouraged in some ways, then when there is a fall, it does not surprise me.
I see. Well, I guess the other aspect of it for me is that it does seem like something we were saying earlier. We both caught that spark of wanting like a serious study. And sometimes like the teachers who had that, or like who offered what to us at the time, or to many at the time, I guess, seemed like more serious or in-depth study, they also sometimes had like a teaching style that some consider abusive now. And I heard a lot of people talking about that even outside of whatever indiscretions in terms of relations with students, that there's this sort of style of teaching which has become sort of, I think, rightly frowned upon, of like shaming students or like berating people in class, right. Basically like teachers venting their shit out on people. We all saw it back in the day if you were in those classes.
Right.
And there's like a dominance to that, and part of it comes from like what you're saying, these like hierarchies of knowledge or whatever. But a lot of that is broken down some because all these gurus like sexually abuse women or whatever, or were abusive on some level. And that really makes it harder for people to do what you just did, is hold the baby and throw out the bathwater or whatever,
Well, I think just because that's how it's always been doesn't equate to it being okay or passable or in exchange for this high level of learning that we're looking for. I think we're all waking up to this shift in the yoga community and these systems that we've created that are just no longer working for us, that we're not willing to exchange our autonomy for the praise of the teacher or a little nugget of enlightenment, whatever we're looking for. It's no longer an exchange that we're willing to make. So I think in the past, we could see a lot of male teachers, even in the recent past, a lot of male teachers dating students, not a consensual, let's say, a consensual relationship. But we're waking up to the fact that this power differential that in a lot of these situations have of, let's say, male teacher and female student, or vice versa, that doesn't, the differential in power, we're no longer okay. We should have never been okay with that, but
yes, it is.
We're drawing a line now, going, no more. We can't. This is too. This is not equal footing, and this will not stand. So I think, especially when you read the letter from this particular woman.
Yes, I read it, and I want to amplify what you're saying too, because it certainly was my case with my teacher, Mark Whitwell. Yeah. The same thing where, I mean, he had further discretions, but the parts that are, there's a sticky place where, like in a process of like a relationship where somebody's like wooing somebody, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if in that dynamic, one of those people is kind of holding this revered place that's sort of like not on equal footing with the other person for it could be a lot of different reasons. And then that person is like talking spiritual talk, but they really have motives of like carnal motives or whatever. Like it's so distasteful, and it so steps over an appropriate line.
For sure.
And it's why I had to cut complete ties. Like I just can't, it's like, it's too not okay, as you're saying. And that is the change, because it was considered okay or something or whatever. We didn't even consider it, I think.
Yeah. I think too, and how they approach the after, right, is an important part of, because people are going to transgress. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to step over lines or create kind of blurriness, and they need to be held accountable. Their feet need to be held to the fire, especially if they're in a position of teacher, of disseminating this knowledge into a vastly female audience.
Yeah.
Then they need to be held accountable for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to be
somebody who can do that, somebody who can hold them accountable. Right.
And in this system, in these kind of hierarchical systems, there is no equal person to him that can, there's only people that revere him as a teacher or that benefit from the financial structures that these systems are in place. People get certifications or are able to teach different material that he has. And so I just feel like the system that he has created, that other lineages have created, just no longer work. They're too rife for this abuse, knowingly, with ill will or evil intentions, or a little bit murkier, a little bit grayer areas. They're rife for abuse.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I also will just say that, when I was looking at your book, which was definitely written before these like revelations came out, It definitely said you were talking about how you ask students to journal about the role that asana plays in their own yoga practice and in their point of view as a teacher. And then you wrote, and I'm quoting you, regardless of how we answer it, we must ask the question instead of just blindly following what our teacher or lineage says is the right way to practice. We must explore, discover, and evolve our own practice. So you've certainly been preaching that for some time, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think because I was involved in many different systems that were not like that, and I see their limitations. I see that we're all so wildly different. Constitution, our physical bodies, how our bones fit together, our energy, our socioeconomic background, like whatever level you want to take it on, we're so wildly different that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all practice. And I know you have spoken to this definitely even from an anatomical point of view. You can't demand a down dog to show up the same in two people. So why are we expecting to just parrot our teachers, whether it's the physical asana, the energetic body, the philosophy, the dogma, their interpretation of a text or sutra? Like, why are we demanding just a parroting of that one-size-fits-all experience?
Well, part of that is because stuff got standardized so we can make more money off of it, but that's a different conversation I don't want to necessarily have right now. What I do want to say is about this idea of separating teachings from teacher, because that is where you sort of started. And to me, I've been thinking about it differently. I think the problem in my mind in the past, when people said that phrase, it made it sound like the teachings were this like abstract thing that just like exist as like some special knowledge. And I felt like more and more, actually, the teachings are like what you as an individual receive. Like what you get, as you said, you studied lots of different people. You take things that have helped you or were of use to you from different teachers, and then they become kind of an amalgam of what your practice is. And in so doing that, you set it up where you are kind of the one steering that ship, and those are the teachings that can be separate from like those people and any misgivings they may have had.
I think Alan actually said this once. I don't know if he originated it, but I remember it coming from him. He's like, you can tell people what sugar tastes like. You can tell them what sugar tastes like. You can dictate what sugar tastes like. You can describe it. Oh, it's granular. It hits this part of my tongue. It has this kind of feeling in my body. But better just to give them the sugar and let them have the experience, right? And that is kind of what I've been trying to direct my teaching more towards, maybe like in the last decade or so. Instead of like teaching, even on a gross anatomical level, this muscle goes from here to here, an origin and insertion, nerve innervation, blah, 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 right? This pose, this is how the setup is for this pose. This is where your hands go. This is what the sutra means. Start sharing all the bits and pieces of information that you have, but then set them up to have an experience of it. Let them sit and digest that experience and then teach from that assimilated place, right? Instead of having them just memorize what came before, or the sequence for knee health, or the, second book, 46 line sutra. It's set them up to have their own embodied experience of the anatomy, of the energy body, of the dharma, so that then they have something to share or something to make manifest in their life, make real in their relationships, in their body, in their breath.
Yeah, everything's become much more of an invitation rather than like an assertion, which I think is definitely better. That's what my practice had to become too.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it, speaking of your book, because it said, like right at the very beginning in intro, it says, it's not really an anatomy book, which I very much appreciated, because if it was just another book of like you said, the muscles and the bones, and that's in there. You have that stuff there. And I might add, like, the artwork is really cool and nicely done, has poetry to it. But it's not just that. And you say that, and you have it in these three parts. You call it the physical, the poetic, and the practical. Mm-hmm. And I guess, the physical part is first to what you were just saying. And that is a big evolution that's happened in the yoga world. And I think it manifests most in classes around the idea of one right alignment.
Sure.
And people kind of realizing that forcing their bodies into an idea of right alignment and forcing other people's bodies into an idea of right alignment was pretty harmful. And most people agree that that's not a good idea. Even my Iyengar friends have turned alignment into somatic inquiry, right? So I guess from that standpoint, from your experience, is that part of what your study into anatomy was about? Did you have injuries and need to work through it, or what was some of the impetus behind why you kind of made anatomy so much a focus of your study?
I think I've always been in love with anatomy from high school or junior high or even grade school. Just really loved studying about the body. I'm not quite sure why. Just to understand who I was would be a lofty answer, but I don't know if it was that. And so I've always been interested. And around the same time I found yoga was the time I went to school for massage therapy. And so there was a great deal of study about the body. And I think probably because I was a dancer, much of it was about injuries or how do I get more out of this pose or this hamstring or get more out of my body. And my first kind of studies of anatomy, in-depth studies of anatomy, and my first kind of teaching in the anatomy world was very much about organizing things into neat boxes. This is the muscular system. This is the skeletal system. This is the glandular system. This muscle has this origin and insertion. It was very I had very cool notebooks, with different
lots of colors and stuff. Right?
Yeah, everything was organized. It was quite beautiful. But then in massage therapy school, we got to see a dissection. And I didn't know Leslie at the time, but I do believe Leslie Kamenoff was a part of this dissection group that worked with Swedish Institute.
Was it Gail Headley?
I think it might have been Gil, but I didn't know Gil at that point. Mm-hmm. So I'm follow him around now, for sure.
He's amazing, right? I came on the show. He blew my mind. What a guy.
Amazing. And I heavily steal from him at any opportunity.
I'm sure he doesn't mind at all.
But I try to always tell people where it came from. But so my first studies were really about kind of dissecting and separating and organizing and almost there was a little bit of a pride born from I could name, all 600 plus muscles and their nerve innervation and their origin and insertion and their Latin, it was kind of like this accumulation of knowledge that I loved, but when you get to see a real body, it blows your freaking mind. You're where is that neat, organized, clearly defined boundary? And you start to recognize, well, that's all just made up, it's all just decided, and that's a Gil thing that we can.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.